ultimately what it boils down to is like, oh, people are different. Like, how do we try and make a map that makes the most sense? How do we simplify things down to, these 3 centers? And then you have 3 types in each center. And then you have the instincts. So you have these 27 variations on each of those. Like, how do we actually deal with some of the nuance and the complexity of humans? Because you are a unique world all to yourself, but you still have patterns. You have things that you do that are not serving you or the people around you. And how do we actually create a tool that names that? And I think the Enneagram does the best job at that.
The Ferment.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Jim Zartman. Jim is the producer and the co-founder of The Art of Growth, one of the world's most popular podcasts focusing on the Enneagram.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, with new songs being added all the time. Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. You can also find them on social media, Facebook at worshipteam.com, Twitter at worshipteam, Instagram at worshipteam_WT. Visit them at worshipteam.com for a free trial today. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Ferment Podcast. And today, I have a special guest from the Northeast, Jim Zartman. What up, Jim?
What is happening? Thank you.
What is happening? What is happening? We've been trying to do this forever.
Yeah.
Finally worked it out.
Yeah, it's been a month. It's almost like we both have a lot going on in the world, and
what in the world?
Which is amazing. This is an amazing platform that we now have in the podcast world, and we're recording in different cities, different states, and are we in different time zones? Are we both East?
No, we are both in Eastern Standard Time. Yeah, but I'm actually right on the line, so it's kind of weird. A little known secret. If you come to my house, you actually have to turn auto update on your phone off, because the phone, depending on which room you're at in my house, will just keep clicking back and forth.
Oh, you're that
and you
close.
Never know what. Yeah, we're that close. Like, you never know what time it is. So I've had people come to our house from other places, and they're just confused constantly.
Right.
So if you come to the Russell Ranch, turn your auto update off.
Yeah, depending on which room you're in, your alarm might go off at a radically different hour.
That's right. That is right.
Cool.
Well, no, Jim, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is because you are also a fellow podcaster.
Yes.
Why don't you just tell everybody about your podcast? Go ahead and plug it.
Yeah, it's called The Art of Growth. It is started as the finishing of my partner and pastor Joel's Enneagram certification, and he had to record and submit panels, which is, 3 or 4 people of the same Enneagram type on a panel to his teachers in order to finish his certification. And I was like, well, dude, let's just throw them online and see if anyone listens to them. We'll just put them up as a podcast and see if anyone listens to it. Maybe like a couple hundred of our friends will find this helpful. And so we made it into a podcast. At the time, it was called the Enneagram Panels podcast. And we launched, season 1. And then we sat back. We're like, all right. So a couple hundred people. A couple thousand people. Wait a minute. 20,000 people just listened to this. Wait a minute. 50,000 people just listened to this. And then we're like, what's going on? We should do another season. Why not? So we did another season. And then we were like, it went from, 50 to 100,000 almost instantly. We did the 30th season. It went to 500,000. And we're like, all right, well, this is apparently a significant part of our lives going forward. This is tapping into something. We're now coaching people all over the world. Just in the last couple of weeks, I had, a woman in Michigan and a guy in Portugal and a couple in Australia, and it's just kind of taken off.
Isn't that weird how this kind of thing can actually happen now?
Yeah.
That's literally something that was not possible even 20 years ago. But just because of the internet, just because of things like, the studio that you're setting in, because of podcasting, we can talk to the whole world.
Yeah, it's very strange and alarming. And when you get an email from someone in Spain, like, hey, can I do a typing interview? And you're like, how do I figure out the time zones on this? It's such a foreign thing. And when we did zero marketing and we never intended it to do this, like this was completely an accident. That's so many of the things in our lives. I mean, that's pretty key in the Vineyard movement, accidental things that turn into.
That's right. Well, and that's one of the things I love about this particular part of your story. We'll jump back and grab the earlier portions of your story, but since we're here, we can dig in for a moment. Yeah. I just love that you and your pastor, and I'm presuming that you're doing all the things that pastors and staff church people do.
Yeah.
I just love that you guys start this as, hey, let's just throw this up, but then it becomes in some ways a new direction and maybe the way in which God is leading you. And it's not something that you necessarily dreamed, necessarily planned on at first, and then all of a sudden this world that you kind of never imagined just opened up in front of you.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost the central point of our faith, is this aspect of surprise. And even our movement, like so many of our songs, you hear like, where does this like great, amazing song? Well, Marie Barnett was, they were having a hard time with a friend in their community, and she just spontaneously sang this song at a small group one night, and that became Breathe, the song that people sing all over the world. These things are just, I think it's almost an aspect of the Vineyard that these things accidentally God just goes, well, it's this now.
That's amazing. Well, I know that your podcast is blown up, and it is an Enneagram podcast, and that's what we want to talk about at some point today. But before we do that, I thought it would be good to just do some personal history first. We normally start it that way here on the Ferment. So if you could, why don't you just tell everybody like where you're from and what kind of family did you grow up in, and were you guys a family of faith?
We were.
Hit us with some of that stuff.
Oh yeah. I was a kid of some Jesus people. Folks from the 70s. My dad in the early 70s, he was a musician, and he wanted to be a pastor and a musician. And he would do these events where like 1,000 people would come out and 200 people would give their lives to Christ. And so he really wanted to be a pastor. And so he went to Dallas Theological Seminary back in the
DTS.
Back in the early 70s. So Vineyard were all heretics because we believed in the Holy Spirit, and that was all demonic.
That's right.
And he had a brain tumor though in his while he was there, and so he never ended up getting to do a lot of the things that he wanted to do. So the world I was raised in was very much a fundamentalist Christian faith for sure. And then around 1990, 91, my dad's favorite professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, a guy named Jack Deere, was coming to Columbus to speak at the Columbus Vineyard, and we heard about it. But he didn't actually speak on the gifts of the Spirit. He came in, he talked about pursuing a passion for Jesus. And my parents were like, well, that's it. That's what we're actually missing in our experience of faith. We're not actually engaged with this aspect of it. And so we continued to go to our old church, but we started going to the Vineyard at the same time back in 91. So I've been in the Vineyard for almost 30 years.
That is so weird because, well, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you, Jim?
I'm 40.
Yeah, okay. So basically your entire life, all of your formational years have been soaked in some sort of like a Vineyard background. Yeah,
I mean, and specifically even a Vineyard worship thing, like, I think that was so much of the identity formation that came from me, because I was like, a kid trying to find my way, 14, 15, 16, and I was like terrible at sports, and that was the only thing I knew that like he did. Anything with sports balls, like I'm so uncoordinated. And but I saw this kid one night at my youth group at the Columbus Vineyard playing a guitar and singing, and I was like, well, I think I could do that. So that night I went home and grabbed my dad's old Martin, the one that's actually sitting behind me back there, and I had a couple Vineyard chord charts, and it like showed you where to put your fingers, and I started playing, and like a month later I only knew 3 chords and could only strum down, but I like led worship at my first small group. And
okay, do you remember the songs or song that you led?
I remember the first song I ever led was Hosanna.
Oh, Carl Tuttle.
Hosanna.
Shout out.
I told him too, actually, when he came to, he had been, away from the Vineyard community for so long. And I was there at his first worship leader retreat. It was his first Vineyard event. And he was in my small group for that. And I was like, the first song I ever led was your tune, man.
That is too good. I was telling someone on this podcast a few weeks ago that I learned how to play guitar by doing the exact same thing you were doing. I just learned how to play Andy Park songs.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember sitting down, you open up the little book, you put your fingers, where you need to make a G, and you play In the Secret, and then you feel so stoked,
I used to lead In the Secret all the time in high school.
Of course you did.
Yeah, man.
Of course. You weren't even a child of the 90s if you couldn't play In the Secret. Okay, so that's how you kind of got into worship leading then, right? You were no good at sports ball, but you found out you could at least play Carl Tuttle songs.
I could play songs, and there was something in it that was just incredible to me. And I wonder if I imagine a lot of worship leaders feel like this. Like when you start playing, there's something of this feeling of coming home. There's something that just settled in my whole body. My whole body has always been very agitated, and a lot of constant movement and a lot of like visceral energy. And there was something that was both engaging because I was pushing out volume, and I was the first worship leader of the Columbus Vineyard Youth Group. So back in the 90s, and at that time it was just me and acoustic guitar and like 40 people. So you're getting to project all this volume. I feel so bad for my dad's old Martin because I like scratched the crap out of this 1967 Brazilian rosewood gorgeous guitar.
Hilarious.
And he's just like, be careful with it. Kind of, it's kind of valuable.
But you just had teenage angst.
But I had that. But it was just amazing because there was something that was so much like a homecoming, so much like a coming to self, so much like a settling and a peace. And I actually didn't even mean to end up leading worship. I actually volunteered to do sound. And my first weekend training on soundboard, I'm like singing harmonies because growing up next to my dad was like an education in harmony. And somebody heard me sing and they're like, can you sing on the worship team next week? I was like, all right.
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and I had so much fun with it. And a lot of people know Mark Tyndall, of course. And I was, by the time I graduated high school, and he was just about to plant the Blue Root Vineyard. And he talked to me. He's like, I always liked you because I used to sing backup on the Saturday night team with a wood block in one pocket and cowbell in the other pocket of my big baggy jeans. And I would like drum with drumsticks on my legs. And he's like,
hilarious.
I had to get to know you. And he's like, and I want you to come and lead worship at the Blue Root Vineyard. So I moved out there.
Okay, I guess I didn't know that part of your story, that you went and hung out with Mark for a little while.
I was there for the very first year of the Blue Root Vineyard, yeah. So I helped plant the very first iteration of that.
Jim, how old would you have been when that happened?
I was 19. I moved out there 3 months after high school. I had never done my own laundry or cooked for myself, and I moved 500 miles away to Philly to help plant this church. But
perfect.
I always tell people, like, if you're 20 and someone you respect asks you to come and do anything, and I looked up to Mark Tyndall huge. I mean, to this day, he's still a hero of mine. And if someone like that asks you, you just say, yeah, I'll just do it. And you're going to figure it out. You're never going to regret that. Like, if you're 20 years old and you're like, I want to learn from Adam Russell, just freaking move to Kentucky. Don't even think about it.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I love that you went, but I also love that Mark invited you to come, that he saw something in you and said, you should come and be a part of this and help me.
Yeah, and he did. He said, I don't want to put words in God's mouth. This is what he said over Skyline Chili. I don't want to put words in God's mouth, but I think you're supposed to be a part of this.
Amazing. That's a really great pastoral frame to put on things, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in God's mouth. Love that.
But
hey, can you come on, please help me? Jim, have you always been a worship leader? I mean, this seems to be like a central thread. Is this kind of always what you've done vocationally?
Not vocationally. I did it for 11 and a half years as a volunteer, and then I've done it for maybe just over that as a job. I mean, I was a janitor at a hotel in Philadelphia. Then I did VLI, and I led at Columbus Vineyard for several years before I moved to Cincinnati, where it was the first time the Cincinnati Vineyard was the first time it was my job.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always say I'm not convinced I was more effective as a staff person than as a volunteer worship leader. And I think I'll always be a volunteer worship leader. I'll always
talk
do
to
that.
me about that, because I hear you making that distinction. Talk to me about that. Why do you feel like you were or are just as effective as a volunteer?
I think there's a lot of aspects of it. At one, I've just been processing this emotionally, and I'm not entirely sure. This is an extremely unformed thought, but I think there's an aspect to which I'm compromised as a employee that I was not in that context.
Sure.
But more than that, it was just from a place of passion. And anyone knows if you turn a passion into a job, there's an aspect of it that you now need something else to fill you. The thing that filled you before now is a taxing thing that you need something else to fill you from. And I've done this so many times in my life where I've turned a passion, because I'm a fast learner and I can take things in really quickly. I turn a passion into a vocation. And I think there's an aspect of that actually can diminish the joy of it or the fulfillment that you can actually get from it. And I think so many times, like I still love to this day, a buddy from another church calls me up and says, like, can you come play bass or guitar or keys or something? And I'm like, absolutely. It's a blast, you know?
Yeah, it is weird how that happens, isn't it? And it is also interesting that when you're just showing up for the passion or just showing up for the love, it does scratch the itch.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good word for a lot of people who are listening, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast really are, young guys or young gals who are just beginning to take the worship journey.
Yeah.
We'll say it that way. And maybe they think, oh, this needs to end up in me being on staff at a church to do this.
Right.
But maybe kind of what I hear you say is, well, maybe or maybe not. Maybe the itch can be scratched just as good, or you can be just as effective as a volunteer.
I think the place that I'm coming to now, as I move more and more towards like a contemplative spirituality myself, is that I have enjoyed every single stage. I loved being a janitor who led worship for a church plant. I love being a small group leader, worship leader. I love every iteration that I've gotten to be a part of. Doing this, leading worship now for over 25 years, every part of it was beautiful. And some of my greatest moments were in front of several thousand people, and several of my greatest moments were in small groups. The most visceral, God-experiencing moments for me have happened in every one of those environments. And so I can't elevate the environment over another.
Well, Jim, that sounds fairly integrated.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I think it does. I think that sounds fairly processed and fairly integrated. And I mean that in the best way possible, which kind of leads us into some of what maybe we wanted to talk about on this podcast. I really wanted you to come on here to talk not only about your own podcast, but about the Enneagram in general, because that's what you've been spending a lot of your time and seem to have a lot of energy and momentum on. Maybe this would be a good spot to just jump here for a moment.
Sure.
A moment ago, you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast about how you and your pastor started the Enneagram Panels podcast. It sort of accidentally blew up.
Yeah.
But I guess I want to start here. How did you get into the Enneagram? Was that how you got into it? Had you heard about it before, or
no? I'd been
or what?
No, I'd been interested in it for a few years, and actually, before I even ever came to Boston, our journey to Boston was interesting because my wife actually had a trip here 5 years before we moved and called me from downtown Boston and said, I think we're going to live here someday, which I thought was really strange because I'd never even been to the East Coast. I definitely didn't know that coming here would make me feel like coming home in a way that I had never experienced before. But when I met Joel, I knew that there was a synergy, and I told him the first time we hung out, like, there's something that we have to say together, and there's something that you have to say that I'm going to help you say to a much wider audience, and I have no idea what that means. Yeah. And it was this, small, like, fledgling church that has gone through a lot the last few years. But this thing, it kind of started. So I'll start with him. It started for Joel Hubbard, where he was in a pretty burned out space, and he's had this feeling like I need to go get certified in this thing. And he went for, I think it was 6 weeks, out to do his whole process of training. And that just like deepened all of our interest in it. And he's like, we've been really wrong on how we've understood this. Like, we almost put out a podcast about it. And then once we recorded it, we're like, we don't know what we're talking about. And we pulled it.
Yeah. So hang on just a second here. Is what I'm hearing that you guys kind of knew some stuff about the Enneagram, then Joel goes out, starts this certification process, and then you're like, whoa, we need to pump the brakes here for a second.
Yeah. We need to pump the brakes. Yeah. We need to really catch up, because I think there's this habit of like, I learned something and I'm going to teach it immediately. And
sure,
I think we had the sense like that would be stupid right now. We're not ready.
Yes.
This actually has to happen in us first. My buddy Mike Breen from 3DM, he always says, before God does it through you, he first does it in you. And I think that's something that has to solidify. Is there was internal work that we needed to do. He needed to face the fact that he was on burnout, and he didn't even notice that he was, because when, not to get into all the types, but he's a type 7. When a type 7 is in burnout, they just keep concocting new ideas and new vision, and that gives them energy. So it makes them feel like they can keep going, even though what they're doing is just spinning.
Yeah, because 7s are avoiders, right?
Yeah, they're avoiding psychological and emotional pain by going into distraction when they're ever consuming and never digesting. So they're always running into the next. And then for me, I wasn't dealing with the vulnerability piece at all. Like, I was just like, I keep things moving quickly and intensely and strongly as a type 8, and I'm not dealing with my stuff at all. And so I think we got into it because, well, I've always been interested in personality stuff. I remember feeling as a young, like a teenager, is the first time I read the Myers-Briggs book, the Please Understand Me, trying to figure stuff out. And then in VLI, we went through the DISC. Those were helpful, and I had a lot of interest in them because I realized a few things. I don't see or experience the world the same way that a lot of the people around me do. I think a lot of people either feel like, the world basically sees things the way I do. A lot of people feel that way. And then there's...
Yeah, I think that's the very beginning of self-awareness, isn't it?
Totally.
To wake up to the fact that the world isn't the same for everyone and not everybody sees it the same.
Yeah, but then there's this other demographic of people that they never feel like anyone sees the world that they do, and they feel completely out of place. And that was much more me. So I knew that people didn't, but I knew that it wasn't like a character issue in them, because I knew they were really different, but they had these beautiful things to offer. And I didn't understand some of the things about myself. Like, why can't I just go along peacefully like everyone else? Why can't I put on the show? Why do I always have to challenge? Why do I have to respond this way? And I think I always had this struggle with some of the leaders in my life, because I had Michael Hansen, who I served under at Columbus Vineyard as a worship leader for years before I moved to Cincinnati. Like, he was very skeptical of me at first, and then we got very close later. And so while I was in Cincinnati for a couple of years, I was having a few issues, and I called him and I was like, what is it? Like, what is it about me? Like, what's the problem? And he goes, well, I love you and I trust you now, but when I first met you, I didn't trust you because I didn't think I could control you. Like, I wasn't sure if you were just going to go off the rails.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you ask all the people who knew me well, who had worked with me, Mark Tyndall and the youth leader, and I'm not going to blow stuff up.
Yeah.
But
he was experiencing that energy that you just naturally have.
Yes. That a lot of people like me, especially in the church, people either immediately put them in leadership positions, or they go on their heels back and they're like, I don't know if I can trust this person. Right?
Yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's somebody with opinions. Give that man a microphone, or please take it away from him.
Or make sure that the experience a lot of times is, if everything's going wrong, you call in someone who has my level of intensity to deal with the situation. But after that, it's like, go sit in the corner. And so I think I got interested because I was always trying to figure out why I didn't quite fit with my subculture, and I couldn't bring myself to just fake it. Like, I could not do that no matter what. And when I came across the Enneagram and I really started reading through the material and started understanding my type, it was like someone was reading my mail. it was like deeply prophetically calling out my life story. And I was so uncomfortable and it was so painful. And it started triggering memories that people in therapy have, that where they're exposed and they're just like these memories that are starting to come back that they thought were, I don't know, not that effective or weren't a big deal, or it was their normal. And it just broke me down. It showed me so much about the way I had been treated and why people responded to me that way. But then it really started, where it got really painful is where it started to reveal stuff about like my personal history, the decisions I made, the way I was parenting, my own marriage. And I think in all the unique ways, I wasn't loving my neighbor as myself.
Hey everybody, Adam here, breaking into this week's episode to remind you about our Sing Together conference happening in Nashville, March 26th through 28th. This is the first Vineyard worship conference that we've had at a national level in over 20 years, and we are stoked. I hope you are coming. Lots of people have signed up. We have a little bit of room left, and we want to fill it all the way up. We have great guests coming. Eleanor Mumford's coming. Ted Kim is coming. Dee Wilson from Common Hymnal is coming. Susan O'Brien is coming. Sam Lane is coming. John Mark McMillan is coming with his whole band. We're throwing a secret show at the Mercy Lounge right after our first evening session. Look, this whole thing's going to be a party. Bring your friends. Bring the people at your church. If you have somebody who's in worship ministry at all, throw them in the car and bring them along. But you need to sign up right now because space is probably going to run out. All right, everybody. Hope to see you there. Well, Jim, can we just dig into this for a second? You said that you sort of like, you're in this moment of transformation and something about like maybe moving to Boston and meeting your new pastor. You're both going through something. So it just sounds like this is sort of like a divine moment of spiritual change and transformation. But then you said you were reading the literature about your own type and it broke you open.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you read that was particularly pointed?
Yeah, so there was a couple things that I read, and one of them was not just reading about my type, but it was the interaction of mine, the type 8, with my wife's, the type 9. And sort of me seeing her and having empathy with her, for her, and seeing the way she's wired. And what really broke me open, and one night in bed laying next to her, I said, I need to repent, like I need to apologize to you. Because for years, I've been pushing you and treating you like you needed to be more like me.
Yeah.
And we both just like broke down weeping because I had never understood my thing where you just take the next hill and just conquer. And even if you don't feel like it, even if you're tired, you just do it no matter what. And it's a lie that I believe about myself, that I can just keep going like that, let alone to put that on someone else who doesn't have that drive and then making her feel inadequate, like why can't I do this thing like he does and I don't want to. And it was just this moment of seeing each other that was both incredibly like painful, but it was like a healing moment and a turning point, I think, for our marriage. And that started having a domino effect on so many other areas.
Yeah, man, I hear that. I really hear that because I'm also a type 8. So I resonate with everything you're saying about, basically unlimited angst, unlimited energy, unlimited. It's not totally true, but the feeling that, you were saying a moment ago, just take that next hill. We can just do this. Doesn't matter how you feel. Just get up and do it, without some awareness of our own not just our type, but this is, I guess, Enneagram language here, our own shadow.
Yeah.
And that same awareness of not everyone else sees this way, is built this way. Gosh, we can just we can put a particular set of glasses on and really hold people in a box they were never meant for.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that came to mind as I started reflecting over this lifelong passion to raise up other worship leaders, to mentor people, and to disciple people, and that had always been a part of my life from a very young age. And it's really cool. The first worship leader I ever discipled is now a worship pastor in another church. And I had this track record of like success, raise up worship leader, and then utter failure. Someone I hurt and I burnt out, and then they just stopped. They disappeared, nowhere to be seen. And I was like, well, what's wrong with them? Was the initial feeling. But then when I looked at it, I'm like, I failed them. I didn't see them for who they were. I didn't see them. It was basically like, you need to step up and come with the same energy as I do, or, get crushed in the process. And I didn't understand who they were as a person. And so when you don't really understand someone, you don't value them enough. And I didn't create like a safe place for them in that understanding. John O'Donohue, he says, love allows understanding to dawn, and where you are understood, you are at home. Understanding nourishes belonging. When you feel understood, you feel free to release yourself into the trust and shelter of the other person's soul. And so some people thrived with me and some did not.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that some aspect of the Enneagram allowed you to have some personal awakenings about the style of leadership that you had, and the way that your own type, or the way that your own spiritual and emotional makeup was being transmitted or transferred to other people. Sometimes in a really great way, but then other times breaking people down.
Yeah, and I couldn't distinguish between why I was successful in one area and completely failing in another area. And so when that happens, I think as leaders, there's often a tendency to be like, well, it was that person's character issue. And often we dismiss things that are innate to that person's personality as character. We do all kinds of things in order to face the truth that like maybe we didn't know how to love them. And when I see the way Jesus interacts with different people, like he's not bringing the same type of energy. He's not bringing the same kind of reaction to every different person. Like, and is that as the ultimate leader, the ultimate model of how to lead people? And as the way I'm wired, I get turning over the tables. I don't get like,
yeah, that's right.
I don't get some of the other things, I can't.
Getting down and washing people's feet.
Yeah. That was always so uncomfortable with me. Like literally, that's one of my favorite passages now, but for so long, I had such a visceral reaction against that passage, and I couldn't understand why.
Interesting.
I knew it was good, and I knew it was Jesus, and so I was obligated. Yeah. But now I'm over my obligations. But there's a part of that passage where it says, "And when he saw that all things had been put under his feet, he took off his robe and he wrapped the towel around his waist." It was like, that was the reaction to seeing actually his authority in a fullness in that moment somehow. But that's the reaction. Yeah. So what does God do when he realizes he has all power?
Yeah.
He takes off his
clothes. Serves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. Well, Jim, this brings up a couple questions that maybe we should dive into, just to kind of like put this in a real clear frame, because I think your story's already doing it.
Yeah.
Can you just talk to us real quick? Because you've already mentioned some other, personality tests or what have you. Could you just talk to us about what separates maybe the Enneagram from other personality surveys or tests?
Yeah, I think the Myers-Briggs was actually helpful for me to understand my energies, like how I was wired to a certain extent. It's hard because every personality test I've ever taken, I've always been like sort of smack down the middle. Even the first time I took like an Enneagram test, I had a 6-way tie on the results. But I don't think the others show you your shadow side. I don't think the others really show you like, this is how you're sabotaging your life. Yeah. Nor do they really show you, here's actually what you can do about it. There's practical steps. And because I think the others showed me my masks, but they didn't tell me I was wearing a mask. And I think a lot about, like, Thomas Merton, he talks about that. To say that I was born in sin is to say that I came into the world with a false self. I was born with a mask. A lot of times these personality things, especially the way the Enneagram has blown up in the last couple of years, it's become part of meme culture, and it's very reductionistic. And so I actually kick against a lot of the stuff that's out there because it's basically saying, well, I can't help it. I'm just this type. Or it's like, I don't want to be put in a box. And both of those are opposite ends of the truth. Because for so many of us, like, guess what? You're already in a box, and the Enneagram's supposed to show you how to get out. And for other people, we take, as Merton says, our shell to be our true identity. And then we protect our fabrications, And I think these are the things that I feel like is some of the advantages. It's better at dealing with relational issues. It's better at having unity in difference. It explains how to have unity in difference. I didn't have nearly the compassion I have now for other people, because if you can't see them, you can't really have compassion for them.
And if you can't see that your type is prototypically maybe somewhat compassion, you're living maybe like if you just lean into your type on the surface, you're kind of operating out of a prototypical compassion deficit, like not realizing that's not your strong suit. If you don't ever see that, then it's hard to lean into it or to know what to do.
Totally, because you can't see yourself. Joel always says, when you can see yourself being yourself, you can finally change. It's not until you can see yourself being yourself. We actually joke about how, so in the Enneagram, there's these 3 triads. You have the head triad, you have the heart triad, and you have the body triad, or the gut triad. And we make jokes about how preachers like preach from their triad or preach from their type. Because for the head triad, it's all about, I want to get the truth, and it's about right teaching and right information and all of that. For the emotion people, it's like, it's all about, we got to care for people, and we got to like make sure that they understand that God loves them. And for the body type, it's like social justice and what are we doing? It's not really about what you think. It's not really about what you feel. It's about what you do that matters. And I can preach from any of those centers, and we often have a blind spot because we preach our type as reality. And it's reductionistic because it's so much broader. And if you're a type 2 who has a tendency to serve other people at the expense of losing sight of who you are and losing sight of your needs, and you're in a church that's like, it's all about outward focus, it's all about the other person, because the person preaching might need to be all about the other person because they're really all about themselves.
Yeah.
But then someone else who comes in who's a type 2 and they're like, it's all about the other person, just serving the other. They can actually engage with the lie of their type in what sounds like a virtuous message.
Yeah, and end up ground down.
Totally. And resentment builds up. And then people are like, where did that person go? They've been serving faithfully for 12 years, and all of a sudden they just blew their whole life up. Well, guess what?
Now we know. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, and I think you mentioned it a moment ago, is that one of the advantages of the Enneagram is maybe it's connected to showing us our shadow side.
I think shadow is one way to put it. There's a lot of different ways of putting it. I think my favorite way to put it is we live on default instead of intention.
Okay, talk to me about that.
So living in default means I have an experience, I have a reaction to that experience, and there's really no space in between. Viktor Frankl, he talks about between stimulus and response, there should be a pause, because in that pause is your freedom to choose. And most people are on default. When so-and-so says this kind of thing, couples do this all the time when we talk to couples. He says this, it triggers her this way, she responds this way, and they're just playing out a script that's been written 100 times. That's living in default. You're not making a decision. You're not living according to actual free will or choice. You are living based on what you have no choice of. If you don't know kind of like, this is what's driving me, because that's what I think a lot of people in the Enneagram world, they focus on the manifestations. Well, this person does this thing because they're a type such and such. No. We really push away from that because it's about motivation. What is driving you? What is driving this person? And if you don't know what's driving you, you are living in default mode where you're not making nearly the amount of decisions that you actually could be making, as opposed to living intentionally. And I think that's actually the goal of the spiritual work, is to actually start to live more from intention than default.
I love that. And again, we keep coming back to this theme of self-awareness and waking up, don't we?
Yeah. Self-awareness it's painful. I had one friend who's an Enneagram type 1, and the first time she looked at the material, she said, I just pushed it away and I couldn't look at it for a year. It took her a year to get back and look at it again, because she said it was just too revealing. It's too painful to actually see ourselves. It's especially when our lies are working for us. So type 1s are not.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to put it. Especially when our lies are when it's making things go well for us, or at least we think so.
Oh, and it does. And if you're in certain environments, your environment can double down on the lie of your type and allow you to continue to lie yourself. So if you're a type 1 who's extremely black and white, moral, and then you are in a moral black and white theology church, they're going to double down on your type, and they're actually going to empower the lie of your type. They're going to empower your default mode instead of challenging you to actually look at your life, to actually go like, here's some nuance. Because nuance and grace actually have to come to the forefront. And for most type 1s, they really struggle with grace. They don't have a lot of grace for themselves. This idea of And because in most of the church, especially in the sort of dogmatic aspects of church, which all of us can have witnessed and is a bit of our reputation, there isn't really grace. Grace is not a gift, it's a loan. And to actually step into where you have to look at grace and be in grace is incredibly disempowering to the lie of the type.
Yeah. I love that. Again, another little thought experiment that I'm sort of like rolling around in my head even now is just the idea of what environments am I currently living in that are empowering the default mode of my own type, or the default mode of my own natural way of being. That's a great self-reflection.
It is, but I would encourage people to be really, really gentle with themselves in this space, because I believe in doing that deep work and asking those really hard questions, but being incredibly gentle with yourself as you do. Because if you're, for instance, someone who deals with a deep desire for safety and security, and that's a driving force of your life, your faith may end up revolving around security and what am I going to get and how am I going to be okay and how am I going to be safe? How am I going to be taken care of now and in the future? It always goes that way toward the future, because I'm always getting pulled when I'm dealing with that fear into the future. To actually have to slow down, to actually have to go, I have enough right here, right now. I don't need more information. I don't need more security. I actually can open my hands. It is a terrifying experience to confront your type.
Yeah, I love that. Be gentle. Take some time.
Very gentle. Very, very. Yeah. And do the work and then come out of it and play and relax.
Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean for you to do the work and then come out and play?
Well, for me, it has to take on a very specific kind of a thing. Like, if I have a really uncomfortable conversation, or if I see a part of myself that's come up, recently I just had a thing with my daughter where we had done a trip, and so she was behind on some schoolwork, and she's only in first grade. But I was like, we have to catch up on all the homework, and we have to do it all right now. And I pushed her to do this, and she got really upset, and then she's distracted, and then she couldn't finish, and then I'm getting really angry, and I'm really being hard on her. Afterwards, she came up and she gave me a hug a half hour later, and she's like, Daddy, I'm so sorry I didn't do good with my homework. And it just broke me open, because I was just exposed for how hard on her I was being, how demanding. And I want her to be tough and I want her to be strong, but I want her to feel like it's safe in this environment and you're not having to perform like this. And I just knelt down in front of her and I said, no, I'm sorry, because this is what, Daddy has this tendency to push way too hard, and I don't want to put that on you. You did an amazing job. And when I see that side of myself and I have to do that work, and then I have to reflect on that story the following day, and I have to reflect on my failure the following day, and I have to like actually have grace for myself. And, 2 years ago, I never would have been able to tell you this story because it makes me feel too exposed. I don't like the feeling of it. But now I've made the choice, like, if I'm going to do this work, I have to be able to sit with myself the next day. I have to be able to tell my stories. And then I'm going to go surfing and I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to go on a bike ride.
Nice.
I'm going to relax and get in nature.
I was wondering what play was for you.
Yeah.
It's not just doing the work, because you said also play.
Yeah.
Is play for you, is it predominantly physical? Is that what I'm hearing in those examples there?
Play for me, I have really learned a lot about this last year. I was turning 40 and I was like, I need to get in shape. And I had been surfing and that was helpful, but I was like, I need to push myself more. So I signed up for a triathlon. And so over that course of the year, I lost like 30 pounds, and that was great and all, and I got in better shape. But at the same time, I learned one of the most important things about me for recovery and for release, which is I need the combination of movement and beauty. Those are the two things for me. So I'll run in the woods near my house. I'll go surfing, being near the ocean, being near the woods, go hiking a mountain up in New Hampshire, like stuff like that has a deep sense of recovery. And in fact, it's some of the only places I've found the capacity to access forgiveness or bitterness I've been holding on to for years. So in this last year, there's something I had been holding on to for a really long time. And it was in the middle of like this 40-mile bike ride where I'm just started to go through a gratitude practice. And I do this thing where I breathe in the word grace and I breathe out the word gratitude. And so I'll just say those words to myself as I breathe over and over. And as I did, it felt like this weight was falling off of me. I was able to release something in movement and beauty that I couldn't release anywhere else.
Yeah, I love that example. I know that's really true for me as well, and maybe this is just some Enneagram 8 stuff or whatever, but I know, and I learned this maybe a few years ago, actually a little bit before I came into any sort of Enneagram awareness, I started realizing that if I would push my body, my emotions were just better.
Yeah.
And I just started to kind of do the math, like there's something about physical exertion that gives some of the negative emotional energy that I just sort of naturally, or it feels like I naturally carry around with me. It gives it a place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that reason, if I just sort of started waking up to the fact that a few years ago, if I cannot go to the gym or ride my mountain bike or something like that pretty consistently, it's really, really hard for me to have a place to put all of the extra energy that I sort of keep around.
Yeah, the lack of movement and beauty has a destabilizing effect. And Chris Heuritz talks about in the Sacred Enneagram how each of the centers have a different default. So the heart triad, there's so much about how do you see me? They're looking toward the outside world. And so for them, solitude is incredibly important to pull away.
Okay, and can you tell us who's in the heart triad?
The 2, the 3, and the 4. So the helper, the achiever, and the creative kind of energy. And so there's 3 things: the stillness, solitude, and silence. And we all need all 3, but the heart triad needs a little more of the solitude. So they're not constantly looking to the outside world to tell them who they are and affirm them. The head triad, they are constantly moving forward. And the 5, 6, and 7, there's this energy that's mental and it's just stirring. And for them, silence is really difficult, to pull away from all the noise, to actually stop listening to music and podcasts and sit in a quiet space with yourself. And they're like, oh my God, it's so hard. And for the 8, 9, and the 1, there's a certain kind of stillness. And I think the movement and beauty were really helpful for me, but there's a point where at the end of the movement, to actually sit down, to be still, to be quiet, and to go, okay, I'm just going to be breathing and in a still space, and like allow for the emotions and the thoughts to do this. Because the whole point is that we're supposed to be developing all 3. We should be developing.
That's right.
Like as an 8, you're going to go first to your body. First, what do I do? And then to my head, I'm going to analyze and do the details. But my heart's going to be a distant third. So it's really about engaging the heart. And for so many of the heart types, they can just like, I have a feeling and then I bounce into my head to create a story. And it's just like this loop that gets no movement going until they actually get into action and say, well, what am I going to do about what I'm thinking and feeling? And it's right. These kind of things that actually bring a lot of the health to a person.
Yes, that's really interesting because it actually gives us, like you were saying a moment ago, it gives us a bit of a path forward for how to live in a healthy way in our type.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that.
Ultimately, what it boils down to is like, oh, people are different. Like, how do we try and make a map that makes the most sense? How do we simplify things down to, these 3 centers, and then you have 3 types in each centers, and then you have the instincts. So you have these 27 variations on each of those. Like, how do we actually deal with some of the nuance and the complexity of humans? Because you are a unique world all to yourself, but you still have patterns. You have things that you do that are not serving you or the people around you. And how do we actually create a tool that names that? And I think the Enneagram does the best job at that.
Well, let's just get real practical for a moment. Maybe we'll just land here. This is a podcast that is listened to by a bunch of pastors and worship leaders in particular, lots of other people, but particularly that segment. And I'm just thinking about all of our worship leaders who have teams and who are managing their own church, calendar and schedules. And I'm wondering maybe if you could just tell us how the Enneagram might help worship leaders to lead their teams better.
Yeah, I think any team dynamics that comes up, there's a reason like there was 4 articles in Forbes last year about the Enneagram, including one that said, if you want to know the combination to making your team work together, this is it. And that's in Forbes. There's so many of these organizations, football teams using them, churches using them. A friend of mine who helps run a $1 billion pharmaceutical company, he says 50% of our energy goes to interpersonal conflict. So if you have a tool on your team that actually helps you to see and value the other to where you know what's driving them and you know what they're motivated by and you understand where your type is showing up as getting in the way, you have this huge advantage in being able to communicate with different people, to effectively lead different people, and especially in partnerships. So like I told some of my story, like the biggest thing that it came out was between my wife and I were very different. And then my daughter and I, Joel and I are pretty similar. We have a few nuances, but it was like an instant. It's very easy to work together. But we worked for a while with someone who was very different for us. And until we had the Enneagram, there was a lot of conflict. And then once we did, we were sitting at a meeting, we were having this argument, and then Joel stopped us and he's like, hey, did you just notice where all of our types just showed up? Like you think he's trying to tell you what to do, but he's actually getting defensive because he's trying to protect you from someone he thinks is trying to take advantage of you. And all of a sudden, the entire meeting changed because we're like, oh, we're doing the thing we do. If we didn't have that tool, it was just left with people being frustrated, never having seen each other. But in a really practical sense, like if your team actually understands each other they're going to do really well. If you have a type 2 on your team who is in conflict with the type 7 because the 7 is always running off into the new thing and the 2 is like saying, how do we practically help the people that are in front of us? You're going to have a tension instead of actually engaging both of these gifts and putting some guardrails around. Like I need particular guardrails in my life. And if you have people that are on your staff, you have people on your team, they may need different guardrails than you. And if you don't know what those are, you are probably at a point where we're going to burn out more leaders. And especially in the last 20 years, the church, we've been burning through a lot of leaders. There's a lot.
Well, Jim, talk to me about how to implement this. Like, how do we introduce it or bring it maybe to our team?
Yeah.
You just want to like give everybody a book. We want to have them do a test. Should we bring in an Enneagram teacher? What's the preferred method here?
Yeah, I think the preferred method depends on the type of the leader. So if you have an overachiever 3 who's the head of the organization, they're going to devour through all the material and be able to teach it all to their team instantly. And then you have someone who's a type 5 who needs to like withdraw by themselves. They're going to go off and listen to all 4 of our seasons of The Art of Growth. And then for a lot of people who are a little bit more structured, they're going to want to have someone like us come in. We're working with a church right now, a couple of corporations, as we have expanded sort of into doing that. And training in that capacity is really helpful because you're getting it in person. And unfortunately, there's a lot of crummy teaching out there because the popularity has exploded so quickly that there are a lot of people who probably shouldn't really be teaching who are right now. But I think if you can find reliable sources who are like the trusted people, the trusted books, like I would highly recommend The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. I would highly recommend Chris Hewrett's book, The Sacred Enneagram. Those are going to be like the top 2 that I'd recommend. The Art of Growth podcast is really helpful. Like we're definitely there to answer questions if people want to connect with us. It's just theartofgrowth.org. Yeah, and ask questions. Ask, like, how do you actually start to bring stuff to your teams? Because a couple places, like, we'll coach one individual and then they'll take it to the rest of their team. And I think that's a good way to do it, too.
Yeah, I love that. Especially some of the books. If you can get your team to read the books, at least about theirself and about a couple of the other team members, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And look at the dynamics
getting people
between couples,
Yeah, especially knowing the type of your leader and then the people that you're working with really closely and how those interact. Well, which one of those books shows how different types show up together? I know that's a very specific question.
The Wisdom of the Enneagram, Russ Hudson's work, he does a lot of that. And
that's interesting
But his
stuff.
is all on the Enneagram Institute website. So if you just Google like Enneagram type 8 and type 2, it will give you this description of like, here's what they bring together. Here's the deep core needs that they are at conflict with. And people will go, oh my goodness, I've been working with this person for 20 years. This describes every fight we've ever had. And we could have avoided this.
Hilarious. That's right. I love that. My wife is a 2, and we've read that.
Yeah.
We've read that a lot of times because it does actually kind of highlight how we show up together.
Yeah.
Kind of profoundly. The first time we read it was a little off the charts, honestly.
Yeah, but you guys get to meet in 5 as you're the equilateral triangle. So if you're able to meet in 5 space, there's a lot of beautiful things that can kind of come out of that.
Amen. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to land on one final question, if that's cool, Jim. And this is the question that we're asking everyone at the end of season 2 here. I'm really interested in, what are you dreaming about right now? What do you have? What's got the hope in your heart?
Oh man, I wish there was one thing.
Okay, top of mind awareness.
Top of mind. Oh man. I'm really excited about getting to work with churches. The more I've actually started coaching people, I just have this amazing time to see them kind of go from being stuck to being aware of knowing what their next step is. just the last couple weeks, that has just like blown my mind. But I'm involved with a lot of things. I'm involved with a travel show that's on Amazon now. Get out there, and we're trying to make a couple other episodes. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about writing. As we leave, I'll leave you with something that I've recently written. I've been writing a lot of like blessings and benedictions over people, because I just feel like anytime I want to leave people, I want to leave them with a blessing. And so I've been writing a lot in this, in the voice of the 8, which is to encourage people to do hard things in a beautiful way. And I think owning my voice, I'm excited about owning my voice as I get to, write these kinds of songs, which I think I've never written before, and to write these kinds of things, which I've never written before. And when I did that, I feel like, oh, I'm in the right spot finally.
Yeah. Typical 8 stuff here, right? Because I asked you what you're dreaming about, and you gave me like 3 things,
it's
right?
always several.
Yeah, of course. It's never one.
No.
Never one. Well, Jim, why don't we just close with you? Why don't you read the blessing that you have?
All right, I will.
Why don't you give us a benediction here?
I will. This is called Becoming Flows from Belonging. May you be nourished in the good ground of belonging. May you be planted among strong trees near fresh water. May you be steady and known, surrounded by stable ground and deep roots. And in that place of belonging, may you witness your becoming. May you be guarded from the full force of the gale winds and emerge from the strength of a formed foundation. As the setting and the seasons shape you, may you come into all the promise that was in the seed of you at the dawn of time. And as you reach out into the light of the fullness of your becoming, may you create a home of belonging for others to thrive in the shadow of the shelter you have become.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for coming on and sharing some time with us on the podcast as well.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, Casey Coram here, producer of the Ferment Podcast. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to remind you about our Sing Together conference in Nashville, Tennessee from March 26th through 28th. It's going to be a great time and we hope to see you there. For more information, go to vineyardworship.com. All right, people. See you next time. Peace.